Welcome back. This is Fire675 bringing you another Firefall Battleframe guide. This guide will be discussing the Accord Biotech frame. When you begin Firefall, you start with the option of selecting one of 5 Tier 1 basic frames. The choices are Assault, Recon, Engineer, Dreadnought, and the Biotech. The unmodified Biotech frame is the second fastest on feet, slower only than the Recon frame. This frame has more hit points than the Recon frame, and a health pool equal to that of the Engineer frame. I personally enjoyed the visual model of this frame, as well as the Recluse and the Dragonfly advanced frames that are based on this frame. There are included elements on the frame that would appear to be functional in a medic type class frame. A slight bit of history about the Biotech frame. In early beta, this frame was more of a straight healer class. The most obvious feature to the Legacy frame was the primary weapon. It had a healing beam weapon, much like the weapon from the Team Fortress 2 medic. Once it locked onto your target, it would allow you to look almost 90 degrees away from your target without losing the lock-on. Mind you, this was back when the game was more focused on PvP than the current iteration, which is more PvE-focused game experience. Eventually, the devs decided that a lock-on beam weapon was not in line with their vision for Firefall, as it was a low-skill mechanism. Red 5 has always held on to the fact that they drive to make Firefall a skill-based shooter MMO. So with the rebrand and a rework, now we have the Biotech. This class functions much better in a PvE world as it is not primarily focused on healing, but instead gives the player the freedom to mix or match abilities to suit their playstyle, as well as a new primary weapon that functions more like the secondary syringe shooter of the Team Fortress 2 medic. The Bio Needler is the default primary weapon of the Biotech frame. This weapon shoots spikes at a high rate of fire, with some slight noticeable ballistic drop at distance. The Yolt Fire shoots a shotgun-type spread of needles that is much more lethal at close quarters. In fact, most people consider this to be the best shotgun, quote-unquote, gun in the game. There is an Accord unlockable blueprint variant of this weapon called the Noxious Needler. With that gun, the secondary fire applies a debuff to the target, increasing the amount of damage taken. As a separate note, the alt fire for the Noxious Needler will not work on non-organic targets, so any robots, loot bots, anything like that, it will have absolutely no effect. The 1.2 patch introduced another primary weapon that can be used by all the Biotech family frames. This weapon is called the Bio-Injector. It has a primary fire that does poison damage on impact, as well as applying a damage over time debuff on the target. The alt fire fires needles that place a heal over time buff on friendly targets. This gives the player a more reliable manner to heal teammates if their abilities are on cooldown, at the cost of losing the short-range burst of the Needler's alt fire. Another negative to the Bio-Injector is the low ammo capacity and low magazine size compared to the Needler's. The Accord Biotech can choose between a fairly wide array of abilities to use. Poison Ball and Poison Trail, and its alternate, Blinding Poison Trail, are the two offensive-only abilities that are available. Healing Wave can be used for both damage and for healing, while the Healing Generator and Triage are pure healing abilities. Starting with the offensive abilities, Poison Trail emits a poison cloud behind you while you run, jump, jet for 5 seconds, leaving the poison trail behind you. While any enemy unit is in the poison, it will take a stacking poison damage. The longer the target remains in the cloud, the more damage per tick it will take. To assist this mechanic, the fog also applies a snare on the target. The Accord unlockable blueprint variant of this ability, the Blinding Poison Trail, also adds an accuracy loss debuff on the affected target, but the ability lasts slightly shorter than the base version. Poison Ball deploys a ball of poison in the direction your gun is aiming at. Poison Ball ability does not bounce like the Healing Ball. Instead, when it makes contact with a surface or an enemy, it'll explode, dealing an instant amount of damage, but then it deploys an AoE cloud of poison that will do damage over time to targets that remain within the poison cloud. Healing Wave is a dual-use ability. Like many abilities that are available to the Dragonfly frame, Healing Wave does an AoE effect that acts differently depending on the target within the affected area. If the target is an enemy, Healing Wave will do direct damage and throw the targets back quite forcefully. If the target is friendly, on the other hand, the Healing Wave will do a direct amount of healing to the target and will not trigger the knockback. Healing Wave projects forward in an arc for a fairly short range of effects. With a base cooldown of 45 seconds, this is the bread and butter ability of the Accord Biotech frame. Get to know it, use it, love it. Triage and its unlockable blueprint cousin, the Ghostly Triage, are very situational abilities. In my experience, you will only find good use for these abilities when in a raid environment. When you use this ability, it will remain active for only 5 seconds, not a lot of time, and it has a full minute base cooldown. When active, it dramatically reduces the activation time for reviving fellow players. If you revive a player when Triage is used, you will also revive the player to full HP, instead of standing them up at only half HP. This effect can also be supplied by the level 30 Dragonfly passive perk called Combat Medic. Again, outside of a raid environment, the normal untriage assisted revives are usually sufficient, and you can top the player's HP off with a blast of Healing Wave or with the alt Bioinjector fire. A side benefit to the Triage ability is the damage resistance buff it places on you while active. At base levels, it will protect you from 20% of incoming damage while active. In patch 1.2, Red 5 removed the bonus damage and healing done while Ghostly Triage was in effect. It only did around 100 damage or healing when passing through something anyway, so it wasn't really a huge loss. So now the only remaining benefit of Ghostly Triage is a zero collision detection while it's active. The final Accord Biotech ability becomes available to you once you hit level 24. This ability is called Healing Generator. It's a deployable item that connects a green beam of energy to friendly targets within range. If any friendly is hooked up to the beam, they gain a 5% life leech to all damage they deal. There is also an AoE healing element to the generator that will heal any friendly target in range, even if they aren't doing any damage. Since this is a deployable, you can modify the ability with a red deployable module, so you can deploy more than one generator at a time. Like all deployables, the Healing Generator has a limited lifespan and a limited amount of hit points. This is one of my favorite healing abilities in the game, and usable by any Biotech frame in the game after level 24. It is very useful for somewhat stationary group fights, where your friendly targets aren't too spread out, and not just blitzing through a mission. As HKMs go, the Accord Biotech's ultimate ability is fairly substandard in my eyes. When active, it arc folds an Accord chemical sprayer into your hands for the next 10 seconds. The weapon acts like a flamethrower of boogers. The cone spray isn't very wide, so it still takes skill to use it. If it hits an enemy, it'll do damage, but if you hit a friendly unit, they will be healed. So, in a way, it works kind of like the Healing Wave. There's also a self-healing aspect to this weapon as well while it's active. The biggest downfall of this weapon is the very short range of effectiveness. You really need to be right up in your target's face, and if you play in third person as I do, you're aware of the issues with shooting things that close up. On to the perks. I always suggest you grab the health regen perk at level 10 for every frame that has one. For the Biotech frames, you should grab Siphoning Unit first. This perk passively gives you a 10% life leech to any damage and healing you do. At level 10 you unlock Persistence. This perk increases your base HP regeneration 30%. Since you're constantly being healed by Siphoning Unit while you're doing damage, this perk may be a pass on most of our Accord Biotech frames. But for other frames that don't have a self-heal mechanism, like the Assault frames for example, this might be very useful. At level 20, you unlock Bioblending. This perk increases your damage output by 10% if you're at full HP. For some frames, this is pretty junky, because you're going to be receiving soaking a lot of damage while you're battling. But with the Biotech frame, with Siphoning Unit, you'll be topped off fairly often, so this 10% will be active a large percentage of the time. This perk may also be good for longer range classes like the Accord Recon and its variants, if they're grouped up and not actively taking fire. Level 30 is where you get another very important perk, Catalytic Poisons. With this perk equipped, as soon as you do poison damage to a target, it gets a 3-second countdown debuff that will burst for direct damage when it hits 0. Most of your damage output as an Accord Biotech is of poison type, so this ability will proc on most targets you're working on. The primary weapons do poison damage, as well as Poison Trail and Poison Ball, obviously. This debuff doesn't stack, but if you're laying down constant damage on the target, it'll get debuffed, burst after 3 seconds, and then the debuff can be reapplied right after. The final perk at level 40 is not very useful. It's called Toxic Finale. Basically, it makes you into a bomb upon incapacitation. So if your HP goes down to 0 and you get knocked down, you explode for poison damage and there's a small cloud around you. Considering this perk requires 8 perk points to grab, and requires you to basically die to use it, there's better options out there. As for perk options outside of the Accord Biotech tree, you can look to the Recluse and the Dragonfly trees for some good options. As discussed before, the Combat Medic perk can be very useful as it makes all your revives bring a patient back up to 100% HP, as well as a passive buff to health regeneration of any squad mates within 100 meters or any other allies within 8 meters. It'll increase their HP regen by 20%. In the Recluse tree, Virus improves all poison damage 5%, and Potent Toxins will apply a snare to any poison damage. Outside of these perks, there's always the survival perks like Run Speed or Flat Resistance to different damage types you could pick up to fill up your perk tree. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this guide helpful. Please consider hitting the like and subscribe to the channel for more Firefall Guides as I produce them. You can click the link above to go to my YouTube channel and check out all my Firefall Guides. I hope you have a wonderful day.